Good afternoon, John Donovan.
Hey, Marty Keller, how you doing?
I'm always doing better when I'm with you, so life is good. And
Yeah.
I'd like to welcome everybody to the Intentional Living podcast that John and I uh, strive to do once a week, and also do one from time to time with our colleague Daniel Gutierrez. So all of these are on the Intentional Living YouTube channel, which is, if you're watching us, you're already there.
Mhm.
And if you're new, what do we do here in the Intentional Living podcast is we look at how to break patterns of behavior that show up when my conscious mind says, don't do that, and I end up doing it anyway. When I feel a compulsion to do something, or sometimes to not do something that in my mind I say I shouldn't do or I should do. And something
Mhm.
happens. It might be don't take another drink, and I find myself take pouring a glass of beer, or it might be uh, don't fight back with my wife, and I end up yelling at her anyway. Or I mean, everybody here has an example of those kinds of behaviors. So, what is that all about? What we talk about in the Intentional Living podcast is the origin of that energy and a process by which we can get in touch, direct emotional, sensational, physical touch with what's going on inside our bodies that
Mhm.
generate this compulsion. And to the intentional living process is called the accountability tree, to essentially befriend that process rather than fight it, rather than resist it, and to use that friendship with this internal energy that we're discovering to create something different,
Yes.
to push it away from us, to use it to be the generation of something intentional. That's why we call it intentional living. How do I want to be? How do I want to feel? How do I
Right.
want to behave toward myself and others?
Right.
I can't change my behavior until I feel the original energy that created that behavior that I say I don't want.
Correct. Yeah. Well put. And that's coming from our subconscious pool of information. And as human, this is not just for people in recovery.
Yeah,
Every human being on the planet is
exactly.
built with this device or this way of holding all the information, all our experiences in our memory. 9/10 of it's relegated to the subconscious, and that's where we hold our trauma and the motivations for the behavior that I don't want to do.
Right.
And
And
it
even a
all
couple
comes
of
from this.
podcasts ago, we explored a little bit how this is neurological. This
Yeah,
isn't just some disembodied psychological stuff floating around somewhere in our innards. This is
right.
actually in our brain cells, the cells of our brains, and probably dispersed through the whole body like memory is as well. So,
Yes, yeah.
um, and so what we're dealing with here is number one, something that's rooted in our body. It's rooted in
Hmm.
our physical nature, which is why it's it's essential to be in touch with the physical expression of it, which we call emotion,
Right.
in order to create change. And secondly, why it's so difficult. Um, we had a conversation last week about some of the investigations of Alice Miller, the Swiss psychologist and psychotherapist, who was one of the first people to identify the primacy of childhood trauma as a driver of adult human psychology.
Yeah.
That many of us, and she dealt directly with these cases, and she chronicled them with individuals that she worked with over the course of her whole career, who had some very severe psychological trauma. Some of it was even physical abuse, sexual abuse.
Hmm.
But anything that we experience as little children that feels like a threat unto death, we often call we often blanket these under the term abandonment, which is just a sense of something happened and all of a sudden I'm all alone and I'm a little kid. I don't know how to take care of myself.
Right.
And so she was a pioneer in that work. Um, and I was talking last week, John, with you about this book called The Body Never Lies, Alice Miller's 2006 book. And one of the things that's interesting about this book, what she does is she takes case studies of famous authors and she talks about their childhood trauma. And we were talking last week about her polemic against the standard interpretation of the fourth commandment of the Mosaic Ten Commandments, honor thy father and thy mother. And she has this really interesting case study of Virginia Woolf, the British writer, who was sexually abused by her brothers when she was not only a little girl, but into her adolescence and even early adulthood.
Mhm.
And she chronicles how Virginia Woolf first started, she her first way of dealing with this when she reached adulthood was to say this is what happened. And then somehow she got exposed to the works of Sigmund Freud, who denied these things and said these are impulses. The things that she was dealing with came from secret impulses, sexual urges, and so forth. And so she, according to Virginia Woolf, she abandoned her understanding that this was a childhood trauma that was leading to her neurosis and psychological dysfunctions, and that it was really more of a Freudian thing. So one, so she was a Alice Miller was a polemicist against denying what happens to us as children.
Yeah,
And we
yeah.
talked last week, and we said we would come to this to dig into this more this week. We talked about um, we began to talk about how do we, each of us in recovery, deal with not just the honor thy father and thy mother, and we talked about a way to understand that differently from the traditional interpretation.
Mhm.
But how does the accountability practice help us deal with that? And you began to talk a little bit, and I wanted to explore this more this week about the forgiveness process. Forgive your
Mhm.
father. We didn't get to your mom yet. And the how do we develop compassion for our parents, which I would suggest is a version of compassion for ourselves. And you also had this concept which I made a note of here, and I thought it was interesting and we could explore more, is that you called it toxic loyalty.
Mhm.
And so all of these things, when we get into recovery, speaking from my own personal experience, it all starts with acknowledging what I'm experiencing in the moment that I can trace back to something unhealed in me that's acting up or showing up because it's in essence it's still asking to be healed.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so maybe we could start the conversation from this notion of how do we how do we begin to acknowledge the truth of what happened to us as children and then separate out the individuals who were our parents, our moms and dads, mothers and fathers, and deal with the fact that they they were the agents of this transmission and they didn't do it on purpose.
Right.
And so
In
how
the
can we, because Alice Miller was kind of a lot of stuff, she's like, we should be free to hate our parents.
right.
And I think what she means there is um, the cultural norm of you must respect and honor your parents means that you can't acknowledge what they did or you're a bad person.
Correct. Yeah, yeah. That was she ran into a lot of resistance, and most people interpreted. And I want to say, from what I understand, the therapeutic community interpreted her as blaming parents, and then the people in the therapeutic community were in their own specific denial frame
Right.
about their own parents, so they weren't able to like receive that. And a lot of what she said or how she said could be interpreted as blame, especially that, allowing us to hate our parents. Well, um, I can say I really didn't like what my parents did. And I know that they did the best they could with the information they had. They didn't have a podcast to listen to. They didn't hear terms like complex post-traumatic stress,
Well, and
societally.
they grew up in a time when going to therapy was it meant that you were like really crazy. And
Right, exactly. Yeah,
it was a no-no in the
yeah,
50s,
yeah,
1950s and
yeah. There
before.
was that stigma against
Right.
therapy itself. Um, and so, how do I acknowledge the abuse or childhood trauma? without blame or judgment. And that's
Exactly.
actually the process that I came up with, and I call it the accountability tree. Um, and let me bring it up. I'm
Yeah, I
gonna
was going to
bring it
suggest
up.
that'd be a good thing.
Um, uh, okay. Okay. So it's over here on the right-hand side of the board. Um, this process I call the accountability tree. Now, a little framework for how this works is understanding. Down here, I have the iceberg, which is a metaphor for 9/10 subconscious memory experiences. Some of them pre-verbal, a lot of them pre-verbal and non-verbal. Even when I learned to talk, I didn't know how to express what was going on inside of my body. And the title of the book, The Body Never Lies, well, if it never lies, then I would assume that it's always telling the truth. And my problem is getting connected to it. What are you talking about, body? It's like I see my body. I can feel I'm skin and bones. What does she mean? Well, um, the body. There's another book by I think it was Vanderkolk, and the body keeps the score.
Right.
Gabor Mate, when the body says no. So there's material resources for people to read. So how do I get it in my body? Um, and there's on the Temple of Delphi, I think over the door, it said, know thyself. That's all it said, know thyself. Well, this is a practice in getting into the what we're framing as the body, which is where I hold all my experiences. Now, some people think the memory is in the brain or in your cells. I happen to believe that it's a source. It could be inside, outside, but that I have access to through my emotional feeling body. And my emotional feeling body in my childhood became the enemy, became the place I didn't want to go. In fact, all the results I have here in this column, codependency, addiction, and avoidant behaviors, were designed to keep me out of my body. So, how do we get into our body? I have up here accountability tree, blame free, judgment free. And then the first term is my truth. What is that? That happens to be where I find myself in the moment. Whatever the truth is about what I'm experiencing in the moment. And
So can I just
yeah,
so does that mean, as I said at the beginning of the podcast, that if I find myself in a behavior that my mind says I shouldn't be doing, that would be my truth?
yes,
Okay. Just to help the
well,
newcomer get
like
it,
I don't want to be violent.
right.
Next
And I'm
time
being and
I'm
I'm
never going to, yeah.
right.
Okay. So I just say the truth. I'm violent. Could be I scream and yell. If I never thought that raising my voice was violent, by the way. When I came to understand the difference between emotional, verbal, and physical violence, I understood that raising my voice for the purpose of intimidating is violent. So I can say, I'm violent, or I raise my voice when I don't want to. Nice deep breath. And in the breath, after stating just the facts, the data, where I find myself, and I use the word data because data doesn't have an emotional charge. Data means simply reading the context. Okay, how do I get to blame free, judgment free? Is that I say that truth because I feel something. I usually go to my mind like, oh my God, that's bad. There's something wrong with me. And instead of allowing that to happen, I simply take a conscious breath. And as I'm consciously breathing, I'm not thinking. I'm out of my head into my body. And then that truth and that breath I experience something internal, a whelming, a flush, something internal. That's body. Okay, and that when I first did this, I had no idea that was there. I just like, oh, what am I feeling? I really don't know. And the process for beginners is to simply do it as it's outlined. And then after you tell the truth, take the breath, the emotion happens. Sometimes we're aware, sometimes we're not. The more you do this, the more acclimated to what's going on internally. It's like a practice. You'll build a skill. And then in that state, I intend. So what do I want to change this truth, which is coming from me? Now that truth, I'm violent, hurts, causes separation, causes destruction, causes isolation. Yes, all that. It does all that. It is not out of alignment with the information in my memory, which is 9/10 subconscious. So I tap into that feeling tone that motivated the behavior. It's right there in that emotion.
And because that is essentially the unhealed trauma that we first experienced before we could talk about it, we could name it, we just
Right,
reacted.
right.
And
And this is why I have,
if it doesn't get healed, it's still in us, in our
right.
subconscious.
That's why I have self validation right there.
Right.
This process is validating self. What? Where you find yourself, blame free, judgment free. And then the intent, I'll lead people. So, what do you want to change that to specific? I'm violent. I intend to be kind. I intend to be violent free. Um, for me, it was sometimes I intend to be sober because I used to blame my drinking on my violence. I intend to be sober. And that intent, backed by the feeling tone, is a command to this um, mechanism. I haven't got into the mechanism yet, but to produce for me kindness, just like it produced for me violent behavior. And the violent behavior was designed to keep me safe, which it didn't work, but that's that doing the same thing over and over, expecting different results. And in this process, I become, I don't know, lucid. I'm going to use the word aware. Something shifts, and I can feel it. I can feel it like a drop in my shoulders, or a sloughing my chest area, or a relaxation, which is counterintuitive to what I just said. Only in this I said it blame free, judgment free. I'm not blaming my parents. I'm not blaming myself. I'm not calling myself stupid. I'm just saying the truth. And a good example of this is the first time I heard myself in an AA meeting introduce myself by saying, "Hi, my name's John. I'm an alcoholic." This happened. Only I had no idea, and I didn't have the accountability tree in my mind at that time. I felt something. I was embodied. I was in my body. And I was in a room full of people who had no blame and no judgment. And they may have clapped when they heard me say it. I'm not sure. That produced an emotion that addressed whatever the trauma was to cause the alcoholism, the addiction. And I found myself thinking, I'm coming back, which was brand new. Because I didn't, when I first went to that particular meeting, I didn't want to be there. I didn't know why I was there. Somebody said it was a good idea I'd be there. I didn't understand what they were talking about, some big book thing. And in that moment, I just heard myself think, I'm coming back. And that was the healing. And again, I didn't know this was going on. In retrospect, I could see that's what happened. So, in this process of me doing this consciously, intentionally, simply saying the truth of where I find myself, no matter where it is, I'm going to use one that's a bit intense. one of the truths I found is that I didn't like myself. Oh, actually, I hate myself.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So I can feel it now. There's still some in there. It's like, yeah, yeah. And that just validated something that I hadn't, oh my God. And in this state, I intend to love myself just the way I am, in all my faults. Love myself just as I am right here in this moment, um, vulnerable. Nice deep breath. So that is now, that's an experience that I'm adding to my total memory, which now influences this thing we haven't talked about, reticular activating, this decision mechanism inside our body. This is how we make decisions. We observe situations, something happened, a loud noise. We associate, we evaluate through our whole experience, and then decide. And the result for me before this process was codependency, addiction, and some type of avoidant behavior. I would choose one of these things, although it was so instantaneous that I didn't see it as a choice. I saw it as I did this because you, or if you hadn't done that, I wouldn't have done this. I didn't see it as coming as a choice from my total experience, which was a lot of unhealed trauma. This process has given me copious amounts of healing. Um, uh, and I present different. My patterns of behavior have shifted to kindness, compassion, all the intents. I intend to love myself, just self love. I remember several years ago looking in the mirror and just smiling, going, "Oh, I like who I've become. Wow." You know, recovery and well into my recovery, I look in the mirror and say, "Dumbass, how come you did that? What's wrong with you? You stupid." And it was just a demonstration that this process had given me something I really didn't know how to ask for, and yet I found myself different, compassionate, kind. I was almost got into an accident one time, and we didn't hit, but it was, I don't know how we didn't hit, but I went in front of them and I looked in the rearview mirror, and my first thought, Marty, was, "Are they okay?" Another example, another demonstration where before I'd have been honking or trying to get behind them, whatever I would, whatever the pattern of it, screaming, yelling. And I didn't have to think about, oh, I wonder if they're okay. I just was in that state of being. I wonder if they're okay. Same way with looking in the mirror. Um, yeah, this is a one of the terms we use sometimes is taking the mystery out of my behavior. Well, if I say the truth, I'm violent. Oh, of course I'm violent. Who, based on what happened to me as a child, how could I not be violent? Violence was the exemplification of how to be a man. That's my, and in our first to 7 years, we're in this hypnotic state where we just say yes. Oh, good. Hey, I'll do that. This is how I act. And it's, I'm not berating that 7 years. That's necessary for us to learn all the nuances of socialization. But giving the lessons from somebody who wasn't socialized is producing another dysfunctional adult. So
So
this process is, I want to say one more thing.
yeah.
This process is what the adult children of alcoholics call being your loving parent. Just, okay, my loving parent, I'm going to tell the truth. I'm violent. And yes, I see that. That must hurt. That must be frustrating. Yes. Which I'm giving to me now, what I didn't get as a little child. Like my mom, I'm screaming, yelling about, didn't get the second cookie. I see you're frustrated and I understand. And we're going to have dinner pretty soon. And maybe we'll have that for dessert. Something that validated my frustration. That didn't happen for me. I wasn't validated. So I didn't know how to handle my frustration other than scream, yell, go get drunk, drive fast, stop fast, all those behaviors. So,
So let's spend a few minutes talking about how we take this awareness that we get when we do the accountability tree
mhm.
and take the so several things happen when I do the accountability tree. Number one, I become aware of something inside myself that I had previously been unaware of, either by design or by structure.
Yes. And it's a
So,
silent place. It's a no word place. It's what Alice Miller refers to in your body.
right,
Your body never lies. You're in that frequency of truth.
right,
You may not know how to express it. You feel it.
right.
Okay.
And so just parenthetically, for those of you who are new, we do have group meetings where we do this together, and part of the
Mhm.
and these meetings are facilitated. So John and I both facilitate different meetings. We have several other colleagues who facilitate meetings, and the value of the facilitator is to help us get to that truth, because we come into this practice, we come into recovery with a, a, an inner system designed to keep us from the truth.
Right.
So, for example, if I'm an alcoholic, I'm drinking so I don't have to go to this truth. And
Right.
whatever addictive behaviors that we find ourselves caught in, it could be something as mundane as I'm playing solitaire on my phone all the time.
Yeah.
Um, so the facilitator helps us focus on the body. So John, when we first worked together, you were facilitating the meeting, and you helped me put my focus on my feeling, which was so new and so strange
Yeah.
that it really was like going to Africa or Asia or someplace I've never been. It was
Right.
like going to a strange country.
Yep.
Um, but what I want to talk about in the remaining time we have together is, how do I take that awareness, knowing that this is all unhealed childhood trauma, and forgive my parents, no blame or judgment, and then which I've come to understand is ultimately, how do I forgive myself for whatever it is I imagine I've done that made me turn out this way. A lot of
I
people
don't.
struggle with forgiveness. I just wanted to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I agree. In this process, my my actually I didn't want to forgive
Yeah,
because I had forgiveness mixed up with acquiescing. In other words, if I forgive my dad, then I say what he did was okay. No, that's not my experience of forgiveness. And you asked me the how. Maybe you didn't, but I'm hearing how.
yeah.
And I don't know. I don't know. I do know that it happens if I intend it in this process. Whatever I intend here, I intend it because I don't know it. If I'm telling the truth that I'm violent, well, the normal societal thing was, well, stop that, be kind. Huh. Well, I didn't have a kind bone in my body. It's like once I understood the breakdown of emotional, verbal, and physical violence, my awareness was, holy cow, everything is immersed in this communication style. It's about judgment. It's about self-deprecating. It's about other deprecating. I'm inundated with this. And people say they want to be enlightened. I'm going to say probably not, because my enlightenment was I'm immersed in violence, and everything I do is violent, and the harder I tried not to be, the more. So right here in the process, I'm violent. Yes, breath, nice deep breath, and that frees me from thinking. If I take a deep breath, conscious breath, I'm not thinking, and the subconscious is engaged, and the subconscious processes 4 million bits of information per second. I don't know, maybe more, maybe less. That's a lot. So in that second and a half of my breath, the emotion was doing a lot of work, a lot of sorting, a lot of, oh yeah, a lot of validating. Yes, that hurt. Yes, that was unfair. Yes, that was not okay. And there's the edge is they did it to me. Well, yes, they did, and they did the best they could with the context of their demographic, their age, and back in the 30s, 40s, they were born in the 20s. Actually, it was a different world. It was just a different world. The interpretation of the Bible, spare the rod, spoil the child, meant beat your children to get them to do what you need them to do. And that's on a continuum. It's, people decide, how intense that is or what's proper. And that belief system has been challenged on I want to say on a wide scale, and we found that it doesn't work. In fact, it actually produces what we say we don't want. So,
One of the things that I discovered um, fairly recently, it was in the last 3, 4 years, about forgiveness is that um, I had an addiction to the emotional resonance of resentment.
yes,
And part of the reason I was unwilling to forgive was because I was unwilling to give up that feeling,
yes,
which ironically has nothing to do with the object of my forgiveness, whether it's myself, my parents, the
right,
world, whatever. It's just about there's a resonance, and this is again family of origin, dysfunction, childhood trauma, unhealed.
unhealed.
So once I got that, so go to your tree. My truth was I like feeling resentful.
Yep.
Take a deep breath and feel that, because when I owned that, I felt, I felt that burning in my face that we call
Mm-hmm.
shame and
Mm-hmm.
embarrassment. And I remember my heartbeat went up. I felt some kind of adrenaline rush.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And whoever was facilitating the meeting, maybe it was you, just coached me to stay with that feeling. And then once I was validating my feeling by staying with it,
Yes.
ask what I wanted. It's like, oh, what do I want here? I want to feel at peace. I want to feel serene. I intend to be at peace. And like you said, if I knew how to be at peace, I wouldn't be in the meeting. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
so I'm there to essentially surrender to a power greater than myself, whether we want to call it God or we want to call it the inner wisdom. I don't care. The body has
Quantum
all this
field.
wisdom,
Yeah.
the field, whatever. All I
Mm-hmm.
know is that I don't feel that addiction to resentment the way I used to. And
Correct.
more importantly, every once in a while when it shows up, it's like, oh, there's that addiction again. And I just do the tree.
Yep.
I give myself permission to feel, to like this resentful feeling or the emotion of
Mm-hmm.
resentment. And then I ask, okay, well, what do I want? Oh, I intend to be at peace.
Right.
So the beauty of this work is that um, as long as I'm willing to do it without blame or judgment. Now, friends, I've been doing this work for 15 years, so I'm not saying I started out automatically doing no blame, no judgment. That took a long time because partly we're addicted to blame, the emotions that come with blame and judgment.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And it's not through any fault of our own. It wasn't when I was a little kid. I said, I think I'll become addicted to blame and judgment feelings.
Yeah.
No, it was just a response.
Right.
And maybe my parents had the same addiction, so I just absorbed it
Yep.
in the emotional environment of my childhood.
Exactly.
So the beauty of this process, John, is that it's once I learned to own it without blame or judgment, once I got to that plane where I could notice when I was being judgmental or blaming, and I could just I could live with that or be, acknowledge that and then get off it.
Yep.
Then I could do this process of owning these things that I had previously thought I shouldn't own. I shouldn't feel resentment, much less should I like being resentful,
Yeah.
and then
Yeah.
create what I wanted instead.
Right.
And so, again, that's the beauty of this process for me. I like what you said about forgiveness. I don't know how to forgive, but I intend to.
I intend to.
I don't know how to overcome this enjoyment of the resentment emotions, but I intend to.
Yeah.
And that, like you said, that goes down back into my subconscious, and there's this. It's almost like magic
Yeah.
because we
Yeah.
can't see it happening.
Yeah.
It's happening, be it by definition, below the level
Right.
of our consciousness,
Yeah.
and yet it's there. It's just like that thing you said about looking up in the rearview mirror instead of putting the finger up. You thought, oh my gosh, I hope that person's okay.
Yeah.
Shift. Where did that come from? It
Right.
came from it came from this work.
Yeah. It came from resolved complex post-traumatic stress.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, John,
Yeah.
it's our time together is coming to an end. It's
Yeah.
a lot of good stuff here, and I just want to let people know that if you'd like to experience this for yourself, please join us in one of our meetings. We do 4 of them a week, and they're all on Zoom, so easy for you to join wherever you are in the world. And the information on where, when, and how will be at the end of the podcast. So please come and join us, and feel free to ask questions, or you can come to the meeting and say nothing. It's like whatever works for you. Um, so before we wrap it up, any last thoughts, John?
Um, um, we've given another resource today. It's Alice Miller. Um, um, and like we talked about the reticular activating system, I would have people like Google it because my understanding of this mechanism of patterns is just my understanding. There's a lot I don't know. So I whatever I'm inspired to look at or examine, I just go ahead and do it. So if anybody's interested in Alice Miller or finding more about what we're talking about, find other resources and other places. And sometimes it takes
Right.
two things that it comes together. So
I'll bet you there's even you can go to YouTube and find some interviews with her.
yeah, oh yeah, that's I'd like
So
to. Yeah,
just again, please feel free to take advantage of all these resources, and please come consider coming to one of our meetings.
yeah,
So
very
with
good.
that, John, I thank you as always for your time and wisdom, and we'll do this again next week.
Yes, thank you, Marty.
Take care.
Mhm.